Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole again here with another video on splitting wedge maintenance. You may think that there's no need to do some maintenance to these, but believe me, if you got the right shape on the splitting wedge, it works a lot better. So typically this type of shape that you see here has a very broad angle, and trying to put that into hard wood like red iron bark, you got no hope in the world. It'll simply bounce off. So what you need to do is get them like this, nice and sharp, and I even made this a little bit thinner. So these two splitting wedges here are identical, but you can see this is wider, but I got an angle grinder and I made it a bit thinner and I made it nice and pointy. Same as this one, I've done exactly the same thing. This one here is a very, very old one. This is made by a company called Trojan here in Australia. So this thing is probably over 60 years old. It's actually got the name on it. I'll just try and find it. There it is. There's the name there, Trojan. So what I'm going to do with this one is make it a little bit sharper. Now, I just brought another brand new one and have a look at that. Exactly the same thing. It's got a very blunt edge. You won't get that in hardwood. No hope in the world. The only hope that you've got of getting them into some timber is if there's a large crack in it. Now, generally the crack in the timber wouldn't be much more than 2 millimeters. So you're not going to get that into a 2 millimeter gap or that, or even that. These you will. So yeah, I'm just going to do some maintenance on them and I'll show you what it comes up like. Okay, so we just ground two of them up. The brand new one came up quite good. As you can see, it's got a very thin edge on it now. That means that allows you to put that in a crack, or what they're actually good for is that if you've got to slide another one beside another one. So it's much easier to do that than try and slide something like this. It's got a very big point. So you can see that the big broad angle, you know, that's over 70 degrees, way too much. It may be okay, you'll get away with it with softwood. This one here we ground up. It makes it much easier to put it into a crack. That's the whole idea why I grind them to a bit of a point rather than have them like this. To me, this is totally unsuitable. I've never seen a crack in a tree. That's probably about 7 millimeters there. I've never seen a crack that big in most logs, only a couple of millimeters. That's all it is. Yeah, well, I've got on there 60 degree bevel. There it is, 60 degree bevel. So yeah, 60 degree bevel is way too much. Bring it right down. Anyway, if you do that, that's a good maintenance tip here in Australia for our eucalypt hardwood. Take it overseas because, as I mentioned earlier before, we've got 5 things that make our wood hard. Our eucalypts, very slow growing. When timber grows slow, it becomes very dense. The fibre length is short, and that also is pretty common with hardwood. Long length fibres is typically with softwood because it grows so fast, the fibres are longer. Having a bit of twist in the eucalypts and interlocking. So if you've got those 5 things, your wood can be very difficult to split with a splitting maul or a splitting axe, and you may use splitting wedges. And if they've got a 60 degree bevel like this one, almost impossible to get it into a little small crack that's only about 2 millimeters wide. You really do need to put get an angle grinder and grind that off so that you can drive it in there. So typically I don't use wedges unless I'm splitting a large round and it's bouncing off and I'm thinking, I'm not going to get through this. And that's when I will use a split-in wedge. And you need a few of them. One of them's not enough. I've got about a half a dozen of them, so don't have to worry about one gets stuck. So I just brought this one here at the local hardware store because they were getting rid of them. They'd been sitting on the shelf for years and they hadn't sold them. And they were just getting rid of them for $10. So I thought, wow, I'll grab one of those. And I use them fairly regularly when I'm playing around, splitting large rounds. I tend to use a hydraulic splitter, but I get a bit of enjoyment. It's great exercise. Look, it really is a good cardio workout. A lot of people go down to the gym. I go down to the wood yard. I like to split a bit of rounds of some timber. Keeps me fit. And I'll do it for hours on end. It's just that when I love the big ones because it's a bit of a challenge. Been doing it for years. And I can certainly guarantee you that in Australian eucalypt hardwood that you need a decent sized maul or a splitting axe of at least 3 kilos, if not more. And you need some splitting wedges. Sometimes if you've got a large round and it's bouncing off and you really want to get into it, you need to put one of those wedges in a crack. Anyway, that's my take on that. Okay, so we've done the maintenance on them and everything came up okay. Now, before we talk a little bit more about what I did and how it came up, I'd just like to mention one other thing, that if you're not used to using splitting wedges and you don't have a crack, let's just say you've got a piece of timber and you don't have a crack in it. Well, if you use a splitting maul, you'll find out that most of the splitting mauls are about 70 millimeters wide. So this is probably just under 70 mil. And the whole idea that if you use the maul, and let's just say that you look where there may be a possible hairline crack, and you get the splitting maul and you strike it as hard as you can into the side of the timber, about an inch or so, or 2 inches from the edge, and it makes a big dent in there. By making a big dent, it'll allow a little thin wedge like that to penetrate. Once you penetrate, yeah, sure, these broad angle wedges like that, you could put them into that. But if there's no cracks, you're never ever going to slam that in with a sledgehammer. It's going to bounce off. I've done it before. As I said, the only way that you'll get those broad angle wedges into a bit of timber, unless it's Pinus radiata or some soft timber like that. But certainly on Australian hardwood, if there's no cracks in it, use your maul or your splitting axe, usually your maul, because the splitting axe is usually much wider. Splitting axe is much wider, up to 100 millimeters, whereas the maul, the edge of the maul is usually not much more than about 60 to 70 millimeters, and you'll be able to sit your wedge into that where it created that large little dent, and you should be able to use a couple of kilo sledgehammer to start to drive it in. Then I use my main 5 kilo sledgehammer once I've started the process of driving the wedge in. So there's a little bit of skill involved. The first easiest process is obviously that if you can take one of these wedges and put it into a crack and drive it in, that's the easiest solution. If that is not an option because it hasn't cracked, you're going to have to use your maul to create a dent and put the splitting wedge in the dent. That way works quite well.